So, hello, welcome, good afternoon. I hope you had a nice lunch and coffee yet, so that you're fresh and up for our discussion. We are talking about NFTs, the metaverse, and DeFi, so quite the line of buzzwords, and buzzwords that have created a lot of traction and also news headlines in the news over the past years. What it all binds together, or what I find personally extremely fascinating, that it brings together not just this technology allows for new processes and structures, but also to actually, which creates a completely new world. And what it all comes together is that the metaverse provides the environment for a fully immersive virtual reality environment. The NFTs, they allow for the interaction in this actually environment, and then the DeFi, or allow for the infrastructure and the architecture to interact with financial transactions in this environment. And it all operates and runs on the blockchain. And now we have here a lineup of very, very impressive speakers. They're all lawyers. But bear with me. There's more. They're all advisors, and they all have very, very impressive CVs and professional track record. But now, without reiterating what you might read on the internet or know already probably, I would like to kick off the conversation by the question: what triggers you, what motivates you, what really got you into the whole metaverse, NFT, it's a whole blockchain world? Because for most people, it's either the money, they're fascinated by the technology, or they're caught in some way from the philosophical side of this new emerging tech space. Andreas, please, what got you into that space?
No, seriously, I think what fascinates me to be in that space and been in there for the past 10 years is really, as a lawyer here, you can help design technology without being a technician or developer, in a way that you meet certain regulatory requirements, or you sometimes avoid to meet those consequences. So you kind of shaping technology or support shaping technology in a way that it is sustainable, and that's what fascinates me.
Thank you. Well, Thomas?
Interestingly enough, I got caught through Second Life. Yeah, I was not playing Second Life. Perhaps somebody remembers. Yeah, a metaverse, some kind of metaverse. But I was reading the newspaper somewhere in 2012, I think, and it was possible to buy the in-game currency with Bitcoin back then. And then lawyers got into their thinking, because it was possible to do robbery and so on and so forth, criminal offenses in that Second Life. Is that a criminal offense according to the criminal code? Since Bitcoin needs energy, to be mined, and therefore it might be worth to have a closer look at that. And that got me into that topic.
Oh, thank you. Oliver, your initiation experience or insight?
Yeah, I mean, what really caught me off guard was the realization that you could use tokens and basically put rights or attach rights to the possessions of tokens. And I mean, I was advising on crypto and blockchain related stuff a couple of years already, but then my background is in banking, finance, capital markets, and then the realization, well, I can issue tokens and I can link them to certain real world assets. That's really what drives my interest up until now.
Great. Thank you. Nina?
Yeah, I came across blockchain in 2015 when I was back in my previous firm, head of fintech, and stumbled across R3 Corda. And then when asking around in Berlin, who can tell me what blockchain is, I got into the Ethereum and Bitcoin scene. But what really made me remain in that space is that I wrote my PhD about the separation of powers in democracies. And I found a lot of similarities in the discussions with, the core Bitcoiners back in 2015, and that really fascinated me. And so I stayed. I was working in the finance area, not in democracy theory anymore. We were working on a lot of ICOs. I think we were the first ones raising an inquiry with BaFin for an ICO and really trying to get our heads around, how can we apply existing law.
Great. Tanya, you're also very, very active in diverse fields and with activities. So what was it that initiated you to this space?
In 2006, I started looking at Napster and Grokster. So I was a digital copyright expert. And I thought to myself at the time, these collective societies, so you'd know of them if you're in the IP world, but the collective societies, that's like the hook. Be quiet. Speed it up, lady. No, I'm kidding. The collective societies in Europe were trying to create a one-stop shop, a solution to clear rights for content, and they were getting nowhere with it. It was a lot of jurisdictional battles, territorial battles, and so I thought to myself, well, in the internet, there is no border. It's borderless. We've been talking about this for a long time. Well, then why can't content move in a borderless way? And all we have to do is track the metadata, attach metadata to it, leverage DRM, and we can put rules in, like Creative Commons was starting to show us for licensing. And so I wrote a paper called A Simple Solution to a Complex Problem, Spontaneous Copyright Licensing for Digital Content. And it was published in 2006 in the Vanderbilt Law Journal. And at the time, I didn't realize it was quite cutting edge. Satoshi, as we know, didn't write his white paper, but I was writing about smart contracts. We would understand them today. And it, I thought we could solve a lot of problems this way. And then very quickly, I decided to test the hypothesis in a philanthropic environment, and it also worked. And I was like, oh, cool. This could actually work for all kinds of things. And so I dove in through blockchain technology, and crypto later became interesting to me.
Oh, we can totally relate to that. So as you see, they're all very visionaries, but also crypto realists as lawyers, and also very pragmatic. And I think it's a good thing to put a pragmatic view, or to take this vantage point to such a sometimes hyped and futuristic, visionary topic. And now I'd like to ask the group, because the differentiation between them is the jurisdiction. So yeah, internet and everything is borderless per definition, or inherently the borderless, but we have here a lawyer from Canada, Germany, Austria, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, so it's really quite the mix, and I think we should take this opportunity to discuss now NFTs from a regulatory perspective, so in terms of how do NFTs actually qualify from a legal side in your jurisdiction, and what kind of trends you see or problems you see in that respect.
Shall I?
You start.
Okay, well, maybe the Swiss view on things, but I'm sure that also applies to many other views. Principally, NFT is somehow a technology standard, so as such, taking a technology-neutral approach, there's no direct qualification of NFT as such from our perspective. So the question is, what does the NFT represent at the end of the day? And now when we talk maybe in this group as well about NFTs, normally we have the vision of the funny ape pictures and other kind of digital collectibles, and there from a Swiss perspective we qualify them as a utility token, so something that is not regulated under financial market laws. However, of course, if you issue an NFT that represents a share in a company, of course this NFT will be treated like a share also from a regulatory perspective. And I think what's important to know, what we currently discussing quite a bit, at least in Switzerland, is also the question, when we only look at the collectible side of NFTs, when do they start to move away from this non-regulated element to something which is actually regulated? And just by way of example, two very short examples, and then I'll pause, is, for example, if you sell an NFT with the promise that you're going to use the money to further curate this collection you have created and use it to, create a secondary market, to do market making even, and kind of increase the value of the already sold piece. This future promise, which is somehow connected to the initial investment when purchasing the NFT, may trigger security regulations. Same thought line would apply if you sell an NFT, kind of which then, at a later point, when a metaverse is built from the money that you sold it from, this NFT allows you to get the gold star platin avatar in this metaverse. Of course, you're not really selling an NFT. Well, you are, but you're selling it in connection to a promise to build a whole world in which this NFT shall have a life. And there again, the same questions arise.
Perhaps to add something from a Liechtenstein point of view, of course, we have or might have the unique situation that in Liechtenstein, from a civil law point of view, we have included provisions in our local blockchain act. Therefore, if it is based on a trustworthy technology, it's a token in the sense of the blockchain act, and therefore all the rules according to the blockchain act apply basically when it comes to the transfer, the collateralization, and so on and so forth to NFTs as well. Yeah, perhaps from my experience when it comes to the supervisory qualification. Often, of course, it helps that the NFT per se is aimed to be non-fungible, which is, of course, the opposite of standardization, yeah, which draws up a demarcation as regards to securities, transferable securities, which are typically standardized. Yeah. But perhaps that's something to elaborate on a European level for you.
Yeah, I mean, what I can add for an Austrian point of view is, first of all, we look at it from different angles. You can look at it from a property law angle, and you can look at it from a regulatory law angle. And I always like to describe tokens in general as, imagine a regular piece of paper. And if if you have 100 pieces and they are all the same, then you could call them a fungible token if you want to port them on the blockchain. If you were now to put a specific marker on every single single piece of paper, and you have 100 numbered pieces, for example, then you could call them on the blockchain side as non-fungible tokens. We both view them as things in terms of property law. So we apply property law on the transfer of tokens. You can acquire ownership, have possession over tokens, and can pass this on according to the regular Austrian principles of transferring other intangible goods. And from a regulatory perspective, we simply ask, what is this token, what is this empty piece of paper used for? You could imagine putting security terms on a piece of paper and it would become a security. You could imagine putting voucher terms, if you will, and you could qualify your token or your piece of paper as a voucher then. So we take a very technology neutral approach, and we really ask what's the token being used for. And also, it doesn't really matter if a non-fungible token is then used in a fungible way. Imagine a banknote, for example. Every banknote might be worth, let's say, 5 francs, but every banknote also has a unique identifying number. Would you then just call the banknotes, which are all the same and have the same purpose, would you call that a non-fungible object? No, you wouldn't. So we look at how a token is used and not what the technology, not what technology is being employed.
Same applies for Germany. It's substance over form as usual, right? So it depends on what is contained in the NFT. Maybe what's special about Germany is that we already have crypto asset defined in our banking law since 2020. So the question, if you said the NFT is not a MiFID security, next question is it a crypto asset according to German banking law? And then that can be the case if it is freely transferable and therefore an possible investment object. And I guess that's the case with most of the NFTs, right? So most of the NFTs out there currently are sold with a view to increase in value. So there is some kind of investment purpose behind it. And in that case, it might very well be a crypto asset, which is a financial instrument as the security is. We are all waiting for months and months now on a publication of the BaFin, which has been promised a long time ago, but they obviously, have some difficulties to find the final version. Maybe what is very interesting, in Germany we don't view tokens as objects. So in Germany, surprise, surprise, there is no ownership in tokens, right? Because there is no absolute right that you can actually have in tokens. So basically you can steal it without, being pursued by criminal law. It's comparable to know-how. You are yourself obliged to handle it securely, right? If you lose it because somebody looks, from the back behind over your shoulder and steals that know-how from you, it's gone. So that's very interesting. There is an international initiative of the UNIDROIT, which is like the legal arm of the United Nations. It's the working group on digital assets, which is drafting currently a model law for the private law aspects of tokens. So that's, I think, interesting to watch out for.
Very much looking forward to that.
Yeah. Wow.
In Canada?
Oh, Canada. Well, we've been working to advance the study of blockchain and digital assets now for many, 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 many years. There's a bill in front of Parliament called C249. It's a private member's bill that I worked with the MP to put onto the table, the order paper, and it's just begging, really. In short, it's begging all the parties to pay attention, to start studying this, to create policy. Our securities regulators, they certainly came out early and quickly. We had Quadriga scandal, which gave them even more ammunition. It was an exchange that basically the guy went to India and never came home and died. We're not sure if he did or not, but no, maybe he did. In any case, all the money went missing. Shocker. But we haven't yet really put boundaries down around anything else. So when it comes to tokens, we don't have clear perspectives. I imagine if an issue went in front of the court, which it hasn't yet, we'd prefer substance over form. There have been some interesting cases around enforcement, which we've seen our national, so our federal, our provincial, and our local police have to use our criminal code in very creative ways to pursue crimes. They're international crimes, they're not just local crimes, scams and whatnot. And so there's a lot of impromptu leveraging legal language to try and figure out what's what. Our typical approach with technology is to try and remain technologically neutral. And so our bar of lawyers capable to handle these matters on the security side is very good, but on the everything else side is still slim. So I think there's still lots to do. We mind always our neighbor to the south, who has really strong opinions on securities and is a little bit whimsical sometimes in ideation. And so we haven't yet, put our feet down flat and taken a stance yet. But I've said now for about 3 years, international trade will force our hand. So I wasn't aware of UNIDROIT. I've been watching the trade discussions, but good to know about UNIDROIT because it will force our hand.
Okay, thank you. Here in Liechtenstein, we're, as you all know, a geographically small but mighty country, and as such, and also as part of the EEA, we will also take over the MiCA regulation. What is your view on the impact of MiCA on NFTs and the metaverse as such, and the so-called relevance or exemption of NFTs from the scope of application? Nina?
Yeah, the question is how far it will reach, right?
Yeah.
Because there had been a lot of discussions. So it seems that serious will not be excluded or included in the exemption and collectives. So the big question is, what are serious, what are collections? So clear example for serious, I think, are fiat banknotes, right? So just numbering the thing will not do the trick. Collections, it's even a bit more difficult, right? So is it a collection if, one painter issues NFTs for all of their paintings? And is that then in MiCA again. So that will be a very interesting thing to watch out for. Actually, we have been on a small general assembly just this lunch break together for Think Block Tank, and we agreed that it's a legal think tank, a European one, that for next year we will analyze, what will remain of the national regulations when MiCA kicks in, right? And that on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. I think that lies ahead of all of us to analyze, what will happen then. But I am afraid that the regulatory framework will be very fragmented because it's exempted from MiCA, right? So there is no European regulation then on NFTs and on DeFi. So you have, again, to look in each and every single country.
But since legal certainty and legal clarity is so decisive and so important for the market players and everyone involved, who do you think will, or where will we get indications or clear guidelines on, as you said, what qualifies now as NFTs, when is it exempt, when not?
There's no expectation to get clear guidance on the EU level anytime soon. So I think next year, presumably not, maybe the year thereafter. But I always say, it also depends upon us, the blockchain community, to actually deliver proposals to the policymakers, right? It's our responsibility to come up with proper ideas, how to define it and, to find arguments why this and that is in the exemption and that is not. So it's not that we can lean back and wait for the regulators to come up with that. We should be proactive.
And just before our panel, actually, we spoke shortly about that. Many people saying now a regulation for Web 3.0 or the metaverse is the next big thing. Thomas, how is that actually coming from the perspective from the Liechtenstein and the TVDG, so the legal framework that we have in place here? Do we still need to change something?
Oh, of course, we will need to change something. Yeah, I assume at least. Yeah, and that was not the aim, of course, of the lawmaker to have a act in place which will aim for being more or less a twin to the Austrian Civil Code. Yeah, being 200 years in force. Yeah, that's just not possible. But I think it's a solid ground for the industry, and that is the bridge to Nina's point. I think there is still the necessity of having national, of course fractionalized, regulation on topics which won't be covered through MiCA. Yeah, and I think that is still a chance, being proud to be in Liechtenstein, for Liechtenstein as a jurisdiction to move forward with those topics.
Yeah. And as a whole in the world, or from your experiences, your practices, what do you see as already existing real use cases, real applications that show practical impact and benefit for users, communities?
Yeah, well, if I may start again, I think from my practice, when we look at the various metaverse projects we're working on, first of all, the question is, what is a metaverse, right? I mean, we have metaverses which are kind of a wider Web3 based community gaming kind of metaverses. So gaming and gambling is one of the key drivers in many metaverses, also from a business perspective, which is of great interest. Of course, as soon as you have a metaverse with gaming aspects, play to earn aspects, you come into gambling regulations, which is based on each jurisdiction a different approach to gambling and online gambling, and those regulations will apply also in the context at hand. Just by way of example, already 1.5 years or 2 years ago, the Swiss gambling authorities, they blocked the access to CryptoKitties. They blocked the access to many NFT-based games because they considered that gambling, and we're now in dispute whether it's really gambling or if something else. But I think the video gaming, gambling space, that's one of the first drivers in metaverses from my perspective.
And maybe I always like to point out, in real life, the commodities are a very minor percentage of all the assets out there. The really vast majority of assets surrounding us are non-fungible, so to speak. Once you used your car, it's getting an individual piece, right? It's not a commodity anymore. And I think that can be reflected in the metaverse as well, and that's where the importance of NFT lies, right? It can mirror, that vast majority of assets out there.
But don't you think, if I may ask, because we were talking, because Austria, quite shortly on the civil law aspects, if you look into metaverse, into digitalization in general, the ownership of digital items becomes more and more important. So I think this idea of having a civil law solution for things is going to be key in each jurisdiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say, though, I'm going to challenge a few things for a moment. I think we're getting a little worked up. I think lawyers are getting a little excitable. Like, honestly, if we just apply an anti-law approach to these discussions, and we say, okay, what law do we already have? What policies do we already have? Can we make it work? The regulators came so strong into crypto, and they said, it's a security. In the US, we heard about the Howey test. It's security, 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 security. Okay, but what about copyright? What about the first intangible asset, which was IP, which has been around a long time, which there's loads of international trade agreements, norms, entities. There's a lot to this. Code is a literary work in copyright. It's IP. I think we should not just think about things from the fintech securities perspective, not just immediately say, yes, sure, we'll jump into your consultation about securities law again, about a new thing, NFT, a new, BTC, pick your 3 letters, whatever's going to continue to come. We have to push back a little bit, because the reality is, if we engage and indulge in these kind of conversations all the time, we will enable only a small amount of people with means, with intelligence of this height of level in this particular space to actually even create in this space. And when we're talking about art and culture and a whole new digital world, which we saw in Second Life and so on before, we can't stick securities law as their barrier to entry. That's absolutely detrimental. When we talk about cultural expression and freedom of expression, there's room for these pushback arguments. There's room for pushback on copyright. Are we now going to say then that if I go and buy a painting, it's different than buying a digital painting? Because we're going to just assume it's going to grow in value. That A, is garbage, it's nonsense garbage, and B, we shouldn't accept that. That's ridiculous. We're also going to undermine all of the laws and rules we have in place for very well-established content industries, which are strong in most of your countries as well as mine, video games. Are we looking? We can't say over here we get this set of terrible, stringent, expensive rules, but over here we're not going to have it. And then we start to fractionalize content distribution on the platforms, and we create more and more and more barriers, and we're going to have very boring, old, mono whatever content. So I feel very strongly we should be the anti-lawyers to the lawyers, the anti-lawyers to the politicians, and push back and say, no, you can't keep pushing down the stream because you feel you have enough comfort speaking in those terms. We need to push everybody to broaden out the conversation. But that's just my challenging rant.
Very much agree.
And as a question to all of you, actually, what do you identify as the biggest trends and the biggest threats to the whole development of the metaverse, including NFTs and DeFi, as I put in context at the beginning?
I mean, I'll go briefly, but I know everybody here will probably have something to say as well. Trend, hype is short-lived. So, what seems cool to a subset of people right now is not lasting. So the hype cycles, the trend is the hype cycles are very short. However, big corporations are starting to invest because this is effectively a digital billboard. It's an opportunity for engagement. So we saw Starbucks come out with their Odyssey announcement a couple of weeks ago. So just to be clear, you can buy Starbucks NFTs with your credit card. You don't need to touch crypto or worry about crypto. massive move. I love this move because everybody can just go do it then. And we don't have to figure out how to set up wallets and so on. Adidas gave a medal, an NFT medal in one of their races in South America. Very cool. They gave a physical medal as well. That's very cool. But you're seeing big brands jump in because they're like, great, new user engagement. And they're going after the 50% of the world that plays video games that are going to eventually come into the space, so trend. Fear, securities, over securitization of everything. And I think this is one of the harm points for everything.
That was probably what Joachim Schwerin said earlier on his in his speech, that when big tech is investing billions, that it's actually taking probably away this power of the community, and that it actually creates, again, more centralized structures and actually creating conglomerates, right?
Yeah, and we really do, like, we have to impress the point, we must keep the barriers to entry low. Must.
Other trends and threats?
Trends, I completely agree. Threats, creating or mirroring the existing monopolies is, I think, a big threat, because we are all talking about moving from Web 2 to Web 3. But if we don't decentralize the whole thing, if we just mirror the monopolies out of Web 2 and Web 3, actually it's not the Web 3 that we were aiming for.
Exactly.
So the question is, what can we do actually to prevent this from happening?
Yeah.
And I personally believe, blockchain is the technology to prevent this, but we need to convince, the policymakers out there that they look beyond all these financial regulatory stuff and start discussing about what value does this technology deliver to us as a society, and how do we want it to be built, right? So actually moving to the other side of the discussion and saying, okay, what is it that I require from this technology, and how should it be built? And then fostering this invention. Also, I'm calling for years for declaring if there is a true decentralized infrastructure built, we need a way that it gets acknowledged tax-wise as charitable. In Germany, we don't have this, right? We use associations, for example, for that purpose, but then they need to do research in order to be charitable. So it's really difficult to do this in Germany, and that's, I think, urgently needed now.
I mean,
Quick. Yeah. Sorry.
No,
Of the time. We still another 2 minutes. Sorry.
we do. Okay. Well, now, the thing is, when I look what has happened in Austria in the last month or so, I mean, I see the NFT hype fade away. I was never really a fan of NFTs. I mean, I understood that people were, using them to sell art, which is one part of all of it, and then use it in games. I didn't really see the practical aspect of it, other than making sure you do not fall under licensed business. So I'm really glad that we see it fade away. That's my 2 cents on it. However,
NFTs are dead. Long live NFTs.
I don't want to end on this note. Perhaps somebody can say something good. A couple of minutes.
Oliver put the RIP on.
I think, of course, Oliver, that is perhaps a problem with a real-world application problem. Yeah. When I was trained in that area, I had to learn from this gentleman to ask one fundamental question when the client first enters on the table, the meeting room, to ask him, why do you use blockchain for your project? Actually, why do you need it? Yeah, why do you need it? And that is, I think, one of the challenges that will continue, that has been a challenge in the past, and that will be a challenge in the future. And we have to be self-critical to ask ourselves as a lawyer, the politicians, as a community, is that really meaningful to use blockchain, to use NFT or whatever for that purpose?
Yeah. But I must say, the hype question aside, there's always loops and hypes and downs. I think that's not really my concern. I think NFT and blockchain allows ownership in digital data, ownership in control of your own digital data. And this has a huge impact on our future when we think of digitalization. Maybe it's a different technology at some point. It may not be called NFT, it may be called something else, but essentially is something that allows us to really control this data, and that has a big impact. And currently, industry-wise, I think obviously entertainment, it's sports, it's customer retention programs, but this will, there are many more industries to come. And the trend, the fears, my fear is that the same fears we had, when you look back 2014, 15, discussing in a smaller room, a bit less light and everything a bit less professional. But it's like the fear that it's an over-regulation, that you react as a regulator too fast because you fear of something you can't even specify what the fear is. You don't really know what the risks are. And so I think that the best thing to do is to wait and see until really you know where risks actually are, and then start regulating, and not try to build up a metaverse regulation around something we don't even know how a metaverse is going to be. Is it going to be centralized, decentralized, semi-decentralized? Who are the players? Is it about technology, about hardware, about display technology, or is it really about data? Who controls that data? So I think it's just too early for that.
But Andreas, we just learned that there is a mandate out in
know,
the EU for doing exactly that, right?
That's why I said the EU has too much money.
Regulation for CBDC and metaverse. That's the next to
send
come.
it to Canada. We'll take your money.
Unfortunately, our time is up. But thank you so much for your insights and experience and contributions. And I serve for the Office for Financial Market Innovation and Digitalization here for the government. And if you don't know yet, we have a publication coming up on DeFi that we worked on yesterday with other experts, a position paper, and we also have on our website impulse-liechtenstein.li a media section with a lot of videos of our blockchain innovation circle that actually tackles a lot of topics, also NFTs and tokenization and other topics that might be of interest for you. So please check it out. And if you have any questions or insights or want to engage, we're always open. And please get in touch. And thank you so much for your patience with us. And have a wonderful rest of the conference. Thank you.